What's up, guys? I'm having to hide my face somewhat after yesterday's 2-4. Awful. Yeah, Oklahoma State should not have been on it. Even though there were chances where it looked like they might be able to get that touchdown to get within that 2-touchdown number. I did not take into account, I thought Texas had no possibility to make the playoff, and it looks like they are going to be in the playoff now. So I totally misjudged that. I thought there was no way. I thought if Alabama won, which they did, which I was right about that one at least. Them covering. I thought they would leapfrog Texas because beating Georgia is a way bigger deal than beating Oklahoma State. Who cares about beating Oklahoma State? You're supposed to beat them, but. As I tweeted last night, the inside sources before the announcements are actually made, it looks like to me that the college football playoff is going to be Michigan at number 1. That's not a surprise. Washington at number 2 because they pulled off the upset and beat Oregon, and they're undefeated and won the Pac-12. So what can you do? I think they're the worst team in the playoff. I don't even think they should be in the playoff. I think they're maybe the 15th best team in college football, but this is just the way it is, man. It's kind of bullshit. And then you got Texas. Looks like they're going to be number 3 and get in and a lot of it is because they beat Alabama. So I think Alabama winning actually is forcing the committee to put Texas in because Texas beat Alabama, and that was early in the season. It was at Alabama, but it was early in the season when Alabama didn't really know who their team was. So. And Alabama, I think, was a 7-point favorite in that game or something like that. Alabama is definitely better than Texas, and especially now because they've kind of figured out who they are. And back then, they didn't really know who they were yet. But I think because Alabama won and the committee is putting Alabama in now at number 4, I believe, if my sources are correct, then they had to put Texas in as well and put them above Alabama because they beat Alabama. It's so stupid. So Texas gets in at number 3, Alabama 4, and then Florida State, when they finished that game, they were in a position where even if they won, they couldn't get in. Although that wasn't on their minds. I think they probably think they could still get in now, and some people do, but my sources are saying that is not the case. But I don't see how you leave an undefeated Florida State team out. They've done everything that they needed to do. They've won without Jordan Travis, but I think it's because they don't have Jordan Travis and there's money at stake here that you have that really flashy dual threat quarterback not there anymore. Florida State's now an ugly team to watch, even though they're still good. Their defense is good. But I think that's going to be the reason why the committee is not going to put Florida State in, because they're not going to bring as many viewers with Jordan Travis out. So I think that's the case. And Georgia gets screwed over more than anybody. You had a great season. You were in the driver's seat, undefeated, number 1 the whole way. Georgia is still clearly one of the top 4 teams. They might still be the best team in college football. You lose barely to Alabama. Now you're out completely. That's completely ridiculous. And Ohio State, even though I don't really like any of these teams, and I'm just saying which teams really deserve to be in as far as how good they are. Ohio State is actually one of the top 4 teams as well. And they're in a similar situation to Georgia where they were undefeated. They played one big game and lost, not by much, to Michigan, and now they're completely out because of it. It's, really crazy, but that's the way college football is. I should have realized, well, I don't know, man. I should have realized that the committee had to put Texas in if Alabama won. I should have factored that in. So that was one thing I missed. So Oklahoma State was the worst play that I was on yesterday. I think maybe the hockey play that clearly did not get there on the, what was I on, the Blues? I think Bennington did not actually start the game for the Blues, although I didn't care that much about that. I thought the handicap was okay, of the spot, but those wound up being the actual losses. Those are easier to take because you're just dead, almost right away. You just know you're on the wrong side. So you're all right, fine. I'll take the loss. The other losses were harder to take, and I almost took another one in college basketball in Florida State. The college basketball was good. I got both of those right. Now I think I'm, 8-2 in college basketball or something? I don't know. College basketball's been rolling, and it's going to be where my additional plays are today in this video, just college basketball. Yeah, Florida State, they were winning the game outright as a 12.5-point underdog over North Carolina, like throughout the game and into the middle of the second half. They were winning the game, I think, by 13 points. And then the refs just started trying to hand the game to North Carolina. The free throw discrepancy was absolutely insane in that game. There was like a 26-point swing in the game in about 5 minutes. And then all of a sudden, North Carolina's winning by 13 after they were just losing by 13 5 minutes prior to that. I'm like, you have to be kidding me. If you're on a 12.5-point underdog and they're winning the game by 13 with 10 minutes left in the game, there's like absolutely no way you should be even close to losing that play. Like, you should be probably cashing on the money line, which of course that didn't happen. Although Florida State did wind up getting within the number still and losing by 8. So at least I won the bet, which I should have, of course. But the free throw discrepancy was absolutely insane. You can see how biased the reffing was. I didn't look at what it was at the very end of the game, but after that ridiculous stretch where the game flipped from a 13-point lead to a 13-point deficit in like 5 minutes, North Carolina had like 20, I think, I don't even know what it was, 23 free throw attempts, and Florida State had 4 in the game. Like, that's indicative of completely biased reffing. And of course, it's going to be in favor of the name team there in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I can't stand it, man. But we were able to overcome the refs in that one. It was the right side to be on, and it still got there, thankfully, although the money line should have cashed on it. So that was that. Florida State. And then, of course, I was very angry. And then Ball State was a nice, easy win. And then I was very angry about the 2 night games, the college football game, Iowa. If they had scored one time, they would have covered that spread. And there was a series of single play events in that game where if any one of them went differently, Iowa still would have covered that game. They were covering the whole game despite not scoring. The only moment where they were not covering was in like the final minute of the game when Michigan got that final field goal, and it was a 50-yard field goal. So if they had missed that, unfortunately, it was in a roofed stadium at Lucas Oil, because if they had missed that, it would have been an Iowa cover. I wasn't even sure they were going to attempt it because Michigan, well, actually, maybe it was with 3 minutes left or so, whatever it was. Michigan had a 4th and 1 there, and if they had run the ball there, they could have potentially run out the clock and won the game right there. So it was kind of odd they even decided to kick it there. I don't know why they did that. I don't know if there was some money factoring in there and there's some rigging going on there, because that was ridiculous. That field goal is what put it over, a 50-yard field goal. So the decision to even kick the field goal, and then the fact that they made a field goal that is quite missable, if either one of those doesn't happen, Iowa probably covers. But then during the middle of the game, Iowa, they had that fumble that looked like it was an incomplete pass that was like inside their own 10-yard line or something. And that basically handed Michigan a touchdown, because Michigan, the handicap that I had was right, dude. Like, Iowa's defense played really well, and Michigan, their offense was awful. They were like under 200 yards total with a couple minutes left in the game. So that's how you know the handicap was right. Like, that's really all you needed, is you needed Iowa's defense to slow down Michigan enough that they couldn't score enough points to cover the spread. And that almost wound up being the case. You needed either that or Iowa scoring one time. And yeah, and that, like, it wound up just on the wrong side of it, just on the wrong side of a bunch of plays there. So there was that fumble that I think was an incomplete pass, and it was, I think they looked at it and overturned it too, which is ridiculous. And that handed Michigan a touchdown to go up 17-0, because it was a 10-0 game late in the third quarter. So Iowa, yeah, when you're in that situation, you have plus 24. I had a great number on it too, because it was down to like 22.5 or something when the game went off. So if the game ended 23-0, I would have been on the right side of it, whereas some bettors that got in at the wrong time wouldn't have. And it still didn't happen. So yeah, that fumble, you could say that it's like an unlikely, like, well, not maybe not unlikely, but a freak event. I mean, I know Iowa's offense is bad, but it's still a freak event to have a fumble just in that moment, in that situation. And I thought it was an incomplete pass. Then there was another play where on one of Michigan's other drives, they completely threw an interception. Like, Iowa's defense was completely fooling them, and the throw was literally right to the Iowa defender, and he dropped it like close to midfield. And if he had maintained, if he had been able to catch that and complete the interception there, that would have completely changed the game, because what happened right after that is that caused Michigan to be able to punt Iowa down to like the 5-yard line. And then is when that fumble happened right after that fumble. So that whole sequence of events, if one of those plays doesn't happen, Iowa probably still covers as well. It was just totally insane, man. Totally insane. And then even at the end of the game, Michigan had like taken out a bunch of their starters because the game was over, and Iowa looked like they still wanted to score at the end there in the final like minute or so just to get on the board, just to not get shut out. There was still motivation for Iowa to score there, and Michigan was kind of just letting up. Michigan obviously didn't really care at that point. They knew they were going to get into the playoff. They don't care about style points at that point. Iowa had a 2nd and 2 on Michigan's side of the field. So like if you convert that, you're probably going to wind up getting in field goal range and at least attempting a field goal to try to get on the board. And then that would cover the spread for you. But what did they do? No, they get a false start. And then if that false start doesn't happen, Iowa probably converts the 2nd and 2 because they can run the ball enough, like a little bit, to pick up a 2nd and 2 if you run multiple plays, even though I think they still had 2 times. Maybe they, no, I don't even know how many timeouts they had left at that point. But even so, the false start, like I think if that doesn't happen, Iowa might cover the spread as well. But no, they get sent back to a 2nd and 7, and then they can't convert it and they turn it over on downs. And they committed another false start in there, so it wound up being 3rd and 12 or something. Iowa's offense is not an offense that can really convert that, but they can certainly convert a 2nd and 2. That was awful. And then the worst one was the Dallas Mavericks, because I would have rather had the Mavericks just be completely out of it, which they were, like all games. It was like, all right, that's a loss. Just write it off as a loss. That would be easier to take than what actually happened, which is Dallas, after they were down by like 20 in the 4th quarter, I think, made this unbelievable comeback. I wasn't watching. I don't even know how they did that, but Luka was playing. He was back after becoming a father. Congratulations to Luka. He went off later in that game. Dallas, not only did they erase the entire deficit, they took the lead and they should have won the game outright. Not only should they have covered the +4 or whatever it was, they should have won outright. They went from being down 20 to, and statistically the game was very close. So it looked like it was a game where they should have covered. All the stats were like pretty close in the game. Dallas, except I guess 3-point percentage was way too high for Oklahoma City, like around 46% or something. And I think Dallas's was like in the higher 30s or something. So there was a little bit of a discrepancy there. But Dallas made that huge comeback. They wound up taking the lead, and they were actually winning by 4 with like a minute and a half left or something. So all you need is to avoid a 9-point swing in the other direction in the final like minute and a half, and that's exactly what happened. Oklahoma City scored multiple times, tied the game back up, and then it wound up coming down to intentional free throws, and Dallas didn't stop intentionally fouling until they were down 6. And they couldn't score again. If they had scored one more time, they would have gotten back within that number, I think, and at least pushed the number that I had, although I think there were 5s out there at some point during the day, so I didn't quite get the best number on that. But between 4 and 5, it's a little bit of a difference in basketball. But, like, I'd rather just have you lose by 20 and just get it over with, which is that's what it looked like was going to happen. But no, Dallas came all the way back, and then they were in a position where they absolutely should have not only covered but won the game outright, being up 4 in the final like minute and a half, and then they allowed a 10-point swing in the other direction in the final minute and a half to still lose and not cover. I just can't take it, man. It's very difficult to take. Let's move on to today. I got 2 NFL plays, and it looks like the line's kind of moving in my direction. I got the Jets at +3, and that line has moved towards the Jets. It looks like the best number you can get now is like a 2, maybe 2.5. It looks like the Jets have 59% of the cash on them now, but 50% of the tickets being split 50-50. So there is money playing the Jets and agreeing with me there and moving it down. I like the Jets side. I mean, I wouldn't blame you if you took the 2. It's like, obviously I'd rather have 3, but I lean to the Jets side in that one still, and it looks like the market is kind of agreeing with me there. And then the 49ers, I think the 2.5s like I got are gone. It looks like it's all 3s, so you can find 3s with reduced juice there, and they got 65% of the cash, but 54% of the tickets. So it looks like, I don't want to say they're actually like a public road favorite, because I do think that the public is going to play the Eagles still at like an underdog price. And it looks like that is happening to some extent, because the 49ers still have the money discrepancy on them. So it tells you the bigger bets are still on the 49ers. So you're still in a way fading the public sort of by doing that. But I like, you can go watch my video. I like the situations in both of those. I'm on the 49ers at 2.5. So I do like both of those. And then, let's get to today's plays. There's an NHL card, but it's a small card. There's no NBA today either. NHL small card, and the strongest lean that I would have, but I can't quite get there because I think they're also in a bad spot. But the strongest lean that I would have is to the Nashville Predators, the Nashville Sex Offenders, because the Buffalo Sabres have gone down from minus 125 all the way down to minus 108, where it's almost teetering on Nashville becoming the favorite in that game, which is crazy. Buffalo with 58% of the cash, but 61% of the tickets on them. So they're the public home favorite, and it looks like the market is kind of shifting. The market is definitely indicating that there is some play on Nashville as the line is moving towards Nashville. And what do we have going on there? I also don't know why the public would be on Buffalo here, because both teams are slightly below 500, but Buffalo's returning from a road trip, a 4-game road trip, although it only took them as far geographically as St. Louis in the middle of the week there. And that was a game that I was on, and I won on because that was after Buffalo had pulled off the only win that they had during that entire road trip, which was at the Rangers. They blew out the Rangers, and the Rangers are in a really bad spot there. But the first 2 games of the road trip were local to Buffalo almost, basically, because they played at New Jersey and lost horribly, played at New York at Madison Square and won that game in blowout fashion. Then they went out to St. Louis, lost. Then they came back to the East Coast and lost in Carolina, which is a pretty big game. I mean, Carolina's a good team, but they lost pretty badly in that one. Now they're returning home with only 1 day off, I think, or no, they're on a back-to-back even. Let me look. I think they might be on a back-to-back, so it is certainly a bad spot for Buffalo. I think it's a 3rd game in 4 days. It is a back-to-back. It is and all of those games are in different cities, and they have Detroit and then Boston next. So they have opponents with winning records up next, whereas Nashville does not have a winning record. So it is definitely a bad travel spot, a back-to-back, a bad rest spot, a return home spot where you have those home return distractions coming into play there. Definitely a bad spot for Buffalo. So all other things equal, I would be on Nashville here, except that Nashville's spot is bad enough that I can't do it. I think I would still take Nashville in this game if I was going to take this game, but Nashville, they are also on a back-to-back. They are also playing a 3rd game in 4 days and a 4th and 6th, but they have less travel because all the games prior to this were at home. So they are in a little bit of a better spot because of that, but it is still a back-to-back. And yesterday they played the Rangers really tough and lost 4-3 after they were winning the game 3-1. So I think it's a situation where Nashville, it might be difficult for them to get up off the mat because Buffalo is also not that great an opponent. You just had the New York Rangers, one of the top teams in hockey right now, on the ropes there, and you lost by 1 after you were winning by 2 goals there. I think it's going to be tough for Nashville to bounce back, so that's why I can't quite get there with Nashville. Even though they lost the previous game really badly to Minnesota 6-1 after they were on a nice 6-game win streak. That was a bad spot probably against Minnesota because they were coming off an overtime win against Pittsburgh, which is a pretty good win, and they had the Rangers game on deck. But now, after you play the Rangers like that, I mean, it is a positive that Nashville gets to leave home and go on the road, and then you get to kind of put that aside a little bit and kind of forget about that and focus on hockey. So there are some slight positives on the Nashville side, but I still think it's too negative coming off that really tough Rangers game to really take Nashville there, but it is more of a negative for Buffalo. I think the entire spot is negative for Buffalo there. So it's a very heavy negative for Buffalo and a slightly less heavy negative for Nashville, I would say. So that's why I can't quite do it on Nashville, even though it does look like it is probably still the correct side. Buffalo is certainly in a go against spot there. And what else we got here? That might be it. I mean, Colorado has to play again today, and they're coming off a shootout late last night at Anaheim. And they have to play the Kings on a back-to-back after playing a shootout. So it's not the best spot for Colorado either, but they did lose that game to the Ducks, and the Ducks had not been playing well, and the Kings are a better team. So I don't think Colorado would totally like lapse in focus there against the Kings, but I would not want to be on Colorado in a spot like that. And LA has actually moved up from -125 to -130 as a home favorite with 81% of the cash, but 71% of the tickets. I don't know about LA being a public home favorite there, but LA being a favorite over Colorado looks a little bit suspicious too, because Colorado's so good, even though the Kings are also pretty good. It is certainly not a good spot for Colorado coming off a shootout and having to play immediately again with no rest, whereas the Kings, I believe, did not play yesterday. So that's what's going on in hockey. Let's go to college basketball where we got 2 plays. Let's see if we can get through this quickly. There are a couple other teams that I think are in kind of bad spots, at least. Like Marist is kind of in an odd position, man. Marist, they're coming off beating Iona as like a 7 or so point underdog. So that's kind of a big win for Marist. And Marist is in an odd spot because they've been like the bottom team in the MAAC, the MAAC, for a while there. So it's odd to see them as like a big favorite against anybody really, which they are today, but they're coming off a big win over Iona, who's been kind of the class of that conference for a while. So I kind of think that Marist is in a bit of a letdown spot there. They've gone down from 8.5 to 7.5 as a favorite. I don't see the percentages here, but it's kind of uncharted territory for Marist to be a favorite really of that degree, really against anybody else in that conference. And they're playing Manhattan today. And that is the case with Marist today. So that's kind of weird. I can't quite get there with it, although when they beat Iona, I was like, maybe I'll look to go against Marist in their next game, but I don't know. I don't think I can quite do it. And Marist, I think this is also their first conference home game. It's their conference home opener, so they might have a little bit of motivation because of that. So keeps me off of it just a little bit, but it does look like they're in a letdown spot. I think Missouri is in kind of a bad spot because they pulled off an upset at Pitt as a pretty big favorite, as a pretty big underdog. I mean, of course, I said it was an upset. Pitt was a pretty big favorite there. Missouri won as like an underdog of 7 or so. Now they come home and play Wichita State, and then they have to go out on the road on 6 days to play Kansas, who's one of the top teams in college basketball, of course, as they usually are. So it looks kind of sandwichy for Missouri because they just pulled off that big upset, and then they have Kansas up next. They're playing Wichita State here today, but there's some things I don't quite like that I see in the market here where Missouri has gone up from 5 to 7. They got 89% of the cash, but only 75% of the tickets there. So it looks like the money, the market is like moving up on Missouri. I don't know if I can quite get there on it, even though I do think it's a sandwich spot for them though, man. And maybe I'll actually do it. Ken Palm only has them winning by 4. Am I going to do it? Am I going to have 3 plays instead of 2 here in college basketball? Oh boy. Even though I only had 2 with a bigger Saturday slate yesterday. Yeah, you know what? Whatever. Let's do it. Wichita State plus 7.5. Let's do it. Missouri, yeah, they're in a sandwich spot, man. They're coming off a big upset. Let me hold the trigger for 1 second here. Let me just see if Wichita, are they in also a bad spot here? They've been playing pretty well this year, even though they've been down in recent years from what they were. And they're coming off a game against Richmond where they won big. I don't think that really matters. They were supposed to win that game, really. Yeah, let's do it. Let's play Wichita as the pretty big underdog there. At Missouri, I think they're in a bad spot. Like I said, they're coming off a nice upset of Pitt. They got Kansas up next. It's a sandwich spot. We're doing it. We're on Wichita. Then what else we got here? One of the games I was going to mention, well, I think Colorado's in a bad spot, but I'm not going to be able to get there in Colorado because they're just too big a favorite, and I think they can dictate the score, but they're in a sandwich spot as well. They're coming off a big loss to Colorado State in that big Colorado rivalry game there. Colorado State's a pretty good team. Colorado lost that game. Now they have to host Pepperdine, but it's enough of a mismatch that I don't quite want to get there with it. But they do have Miami on deck, another highly ranked team. So it is a sandwich for Colorado. So I would look to fade Colorado there if I was going to play that one, which I don't think I can get there with that one. Colorado's up from 16.5 to 18, although it looks like they've only 60% of the cash with 67% of the tickets. So the lean there would be to Pepperdine, and I don't quite want to do it in a spot where the line is that big. And we do have a game where there's one of those ranking discrepancies versus what the odds are telling you with Creighton and Nebraska. Creighton is up from 3.5 to 4 with 82% of the tickets, but only 75% of the cash. So Creighton looks like that typical road favorite there, public road favorite, where the line looks like a trap, man. Creighton's ranked. Everybody saw them make that nice run last year. They got some really good shooters on that team. They got Shearman in there still, who had transferred over there out of South Dakota State to play for Creighton last year, and he really they really moved up last year. They had a really good team last year, and I had them in the Final Four in my bracket last year, and they almost got there. So Creighton, they're a ranked team. Everybody likes their offense, likes their shooting. They're playing at a really ugly, like kind of slow-paced Nebraska team. But Nebraska is actually undefeated, but they haven't really played anybody good yet this year. But I think this is a bigger game for Nebraska because they've been playing second fiddle in the state of Nebraska. Creighton is an Omaha school, so this is an in-state rivalry. I think they play every year. Nebraska's playing like the little brother role here because Creighton's been the better team than they have been, and Creighton's higher ranked than they are. This is going to be at Nebraska. I think Nebraska is going to be pumped up for this game, whereas Creighton, they're the bigger brother, so maybe not quite as much. They're coming off maybe a bigger win against Oklahoma State, who's a Big 12 team, even though Oklahoma State hasn't really been playing well, so we don't really know how good they are. Probably not that good, but the line just looks really suspicious on Creighton there. It looks way too easy to just lay 3.5 or 4 on Creighton. So I would look to the Nebraska side there as one of those fades of a public road favorite that looks like kind of a tiny public road favorite where it looks way too easy to take that road favorite who is ranked playing at the home of an unranked. So I do lean to Nebraska there. And then the other plays that I'm actually on, one of them is going to be on Appalachian State. This is a play where even though it looks like the market was indicating against me a little bit with the cash discrepancy, but I still don't really buy it. Appalachian State is hosting Auburn. The public bettors are only going to want to be on Auburn here. They've seen what Auburn has done the last few seasons. Auburn has been a very good college basketball team. They've been in the tournament, even though they've not played particularly well in the tournament in a lot of cases, and fell victim to some upsets and played not that well as like a big favorite in the tournament in some of those cases. But they're a fairly substantial road favorite in this one. They're a 7.5 point favorite. I mean, they're still Auburn. They're an SEC team. They got Bruce Pearl is still their coach there. I think everybody knows Auburn's a good team. They like that Auburn scores a lot. Auburn plays pretty good offense. People like that about that. Their defense tends to really lack under Bruce Pearl, though. Auburn sitting at a 7.5 point road favorite here. They got 70% of the tickets, but 73% of the cash. I'm not sure I quite buy that cash discrepancy. Obviously, I am buying their public road favorite here. I'm fading them, though. I think they're in a sandwich spot here. So they just beat Virginia Tech, even though we don't really know how good Virginia Tech really is. Or Virginia Tech is still, they're usually like kind of like recently they've been kind of like a bubble type team. They're like a decent college basketball team. That was in the ACC SEC challenge. So those teams like to take those games a bit seriously and represent their conferences there. Auburn was a fairly decent sized favorite there, and they won and they covered a pretty big win against an ACC school. So you take those games seriously. So I think it sets this game up to be a little bit of a sandwich. It's definitely a down scheduling spot for Auburn compared to what's surrounding it. And in that game, both teams shot terribly, but the result was a little bit misleading because Virginia Tech, they only shot 27% from the field, which is an outlier. That is really bad, really low. You don't see teams shoot that poorly. Auburn didn't even shoot well. They shot 38% from the field. That's not good either. But Virginia Tech shot so poorly that factored into that game quite a bit. And they had 21 turnovers to Auburn's 8. So the score maybe a little bit misleading there because Virginia Tech turned it over so much and shot so poorly that kind of had to do with that result there. So maybe Auburn looks a little bit too good off of that win, even though they were supposed to win that game, of course, because they were the pretty big favorite there. And who does Auburn have next? They got Indiana next, man. And Indiana, that's in 6 days. That's a pretty big name, Indiana. Big name in college basketball. Of course, they're usually in the tournament as one of those. They've been like one of those mid-level seeds recently. They're a good team. You might have one eye looking ahead to that Indiana game. Indiana's good. You have to go on the road for your first actual road game to an unfamiliar place there in Appalachian State. It looks like a weird spot for Auburn, man. It looks like a spot where they could get caught. This game's surrounded by games against bigger conference teams, against an ACC team and a Big Ten team, and you have to go on the road to play a Sun Belt team that hasn't even really been that good in the Sun Belt recently. Although they're playing well so far this year, but they haven't really faced anybody that good yet. But App State does look like they have been playing pretty well. And what do we got going on in the over on the KenPom side of things here? They have Auburn winning this game by 7, so that's pretty close as well. So I think it's a sandwich spot, though, for Auburn, man. I mean, they looked a bit too good based on how the game went statistically against Virginia Tech. That's a fairly big win just because it's against an ACC school. You got a Big Ten school up next who's been a pretty good team in the Big Ten recently. That's kind of a big matchup as well. This is your first actual road game of the season where teams can tend to kind of slip up when they have their first road game, and it's kind of a weird, like, unfamiliar environment. You're laying points on the road. For Appalachian State, I think it's a much bigger deal because you have a big-name team in Auburn coming into your house. You're going to want to play well. This is one of your bigger games on the schedule, one of your biggest, really, because conference play is about to start. So this is like the biggest opponent that App State has on their schedule, really, whereas for Auburn, that is not the case. For Auburn, it's like one of the lesser games on their schedule, but for App State, it's one of the biggest. So there's that motivational discrepancy there. I like App State. And then the other game I'm on, which I think is maybe the strongest, is I'm going to be on Pitt -1.5. And it looks like they open as a 1-point underdog at home, and they flip to a 1.5-point favorite. KenPom, I think, has Pitt by 1 in this one. But I like the schedule. I like the scheduling spot a lot here, man, for Pitt. Even though it does look like Clemson has 87% of the cash, but 73% of the tickets. So it looks like the cash discrepancy, according to the percentages, is on Clemson, but I'm not sure I totally buy into that because the line has flipped the favorite to the Pittsburgh side, although you might argue it's some of those players. There are some professional players out there that see a number that's close to a pick 'em, and they like to play the team that's the underdog really heavily on one side and then try to get the favorite to flip and then play the other team also as an underdog. So you have both teams both in an underdog price. So regardless of the outcome of the game, you wind up winning like a really small amount. So there are guys that do that. But Clemson, I think they're in a bad spot because they're coming off beating Alabama. That's a big win, man. You beat Alabama, who was one of the top teams in college basketball last year. They started out ranked as such this year as well. They're still ranked. They're still a good team. But that was a really big game for Clemson. That was also in the ACC-SEC Challenge, representing the ACC there. Clemson was an 8.5-point underdog at Alabama in that one. They won, and they shot out of their minds in that game, man. They shot 53% from the field and almost 53% from 3-point range, and they still were losing that game in the second half and wound up getting the win anyway by 8. But when you shoot that well and you still are like losing the game fairly deep into the game, that's crazy, man. That kind of tells you that this team maybe isn't as good as they looked in that game. Clemson is sitting at an undefeated record now. It looks really good that they beat Alabama. They pulled off a huge upset there. But like I said, the shooting percentages on the Clemson side were just total outliers in that game. That's just crazy that they shot that well in that game. I think they're ripe for a letdown here. They look too good off of that game. Now they have to go to Pittsburgh. Looks like kind of a tricky spot, even though it is the conference opener, I believe, for both of these teams. So the motivation will be there on both sides, but it is also the home opener for Pittsburgh, I believe. Is it? I hope it is. I think it is. But yeah, that's the situation there on the Clemson side of things. Yes, it is the first ACC game for both teams. Whereas Pittsburgh, nobody's really going to want to be on Pittsburgh after what they saw last. Pittsburgh, really, they haven't played anybody good yet. And the best team, I believe, that they played was against, was it the last game against Missouri? Maybe that was their best game. They're the best team that they faced. I don't know, because they faced Florida, then Oregon State, then Missouri. I don't know. None of those teams are great, although Florida has like the name recognition. They're not really that great right now. Oregon State's not really good either. But then the Missouri game, Missouri pulled off an upset over Pitt. Pitt was at home, I believe, in that game. That was part of the SEC ACC challenge as well, I believe. And Pittsburgh lost that game badly as a 7 or so point favorite. They lost by 7. So they're going to want to bounce back, man. They look a lot worse than they are in their game there. Clemson looks a lot better than they actually are in their win over Auburn. So you have those kind of discrepancies coming into play here where people are going to have recency bias and look at that last game that each of them played and think Clemson just beat Alabama as a huge, when they were a huge underdog. Clemson is obviously awesome. Whereas Pitt, they looked awful against Missouri. They lost to Missouri as like a big favorite. So nobody's going to want to take Pitt here. Like the public is going to certainly be on Clemson here. Clemson's undefeated. They looked really good in that win over Alabama. Pitt looked awful against Missouri. They kind of play an ugly style as well. So like, is anybody really going to want Pitt here? Probably not. And that's why I want it, man. Because we got recency bias factoring, and I think there's going to be value on the Pittsburgh side because of what bettors saw last, what we saw last out of both of these teams. And I think Clemson is in a pretty big letdown spot. And statistically, that game was not what it appeared, really. Clemson they had like an unsustainable shooting performance. And when you shoot that well, you should be winning that. There was such a shooting discrepancy in that game. It's shocking that Clemson didn't win that game by like 20 points. So that's what I'm doing. This is crazy, man. Go check out my NFL video to see the breakdown on those 2 NFL plays for today. And I talked about a couple of the other games too. The plays in college basketball today are on Appalachian State plus 7.5 at home. Pittsburgh, which I think is probably the strongest play, minus 1.5 at home. And then the one that I think is the weakest because I just decided to jump on it. Wichita State also at plus 7.5 as a road underdog. So that's going to do it for the plays today, man. A bunch of plays, 5 plays on the board for today. Hopefully we turn it around after I was really hot. And then yesterday kind of caught me. But like I said, 2 of those losses were pretty questionable. 2 were definitely ones that were losses that I should just take and deal with. 2 of them are just losses that should not have been losses that are really tough to take. So hopefully we get it today. Peace out.